We're getting into something literally mind-expanding today. We're breaking down Stanford neuroscientist Robert Sapolsky's incredible framework from his book, Behave. Before writing this magnum opus, Sapolsky spent decades just out in the Kenyan savannas watching baboon troops to figure out where primate aggression and stress actually come from biologically. So, in this explainer, we're going on an epic scientific quest to completely decode human behavior. But we're not just looking at biology in isolation. We're tracing it backwards through a fascinating reverse chronological timeline. You've probably wondered this yourself at some point, right? Why are humans capable of profound altruism and horrific cruelty? Why are we a species that can step up to save a total stranger from a burning building in one breath, and then commit horrific acts of systematic cruelty or war in the next? Or, even just zooming in on a more personal level, why do your own decisions and moods swing so wildly depending on whether you're just stressed, or tired, or feeling inspired? It's a profound paradox, and it's the exact puzzle we're going to solve today. Okay, let's dive into this. Here is the structural roadmap for our journey. We'll be hitting 6 sections. Section 1, the second before action. Section 2, hours and days before. Section 3, decades to millennia before. Section 4, the biology of tribalism. Section 5, empathy and moral courage. And wrapping up with Section 6, rethinking free will. So the entire premise of our explainer hinges on this exact biological timeline. Sapolsky's big argument is that to understand any human action, whether that's pulling a trigger or extending a helping hand, you cannot just look at the moment itself. You have to hit rewind. The brain activity 1 second before an event is fundamentally shaped by your hormones an hour before. And those hormones, they're shaped by the neuroplasticity of the past year, which was built on your childhood environment, and all of it rests on this massive foundation of evolutionary history. Absolutely nothing happens in a vacuum. Section 1. The second before action, the brain's tug-of-war. Zooming right in on the exact split second a behavior occurs, there is a literal metabolic tug-of-war happening inside your nervous system. On one side, you've got the amygdala. That's your ancient alarm system processing fear, threat, and anger. Because of how we're wired, it receives sensory information fractions of a second before the rest of your brain even registers what's going on. It prioritizes speed over accuracy, which means it drives snap judgments and impulsive aggression. But standing as its direct counterweight is the prefrontal cortex. This is the adult in the room. It handles long-term planning, impulse control, ethical reasoning. It makes you do the harder thing when it's the right thing. But here's the catch. The prefrontal cortex is massively energy hungry. It requires huge amounts of glucose to work. So when it fatigues, your reactive amygdala basically just grabs the steering wheel. And smack in the middle of this intense battle is the mesolimbic dopamine system. Now, most people think dopamine is just the pleasure chemical, right? But in reality, it's actually all about the anticipation of a reward. Dopamine surges while you're pursuing a goal, and incredibly, it spikes the highest when the reward is totally uncertain. Think about pulling the lever on a slot machine. The not knowing is what actually hooks you. This system acts as the engine driving our actions, whether that means relentlessly scrolling social media for an unpredictable payoff or finding the gritty motivation to pursue a massive multi-year life goal. Let's zoom out a bit. Section 2, hours and days before, sensory cues and hormones. 65%. That is an absolutely staggering rate. In a really famous behavioral study examining over 1,000 parole decisions, made by highly experienced, highly educated judges, mind you, 65% was the rate at which they granted parole to prisoners right after the judge had returned from a scheduled meal break. But check this out, 0%. This brilliantly illustrates what happens when blood sugar drops. As the hours ticked by and the judge's prefrontal cortex ran low on metabolic energy, they experienced what behavioral economists call decision fatigue. The parole rate plummeted to roughly 0% right before lunch. Without the glucose needed for the prefrontal cortex to weigh complex, empathetic factors, the brain just defaulted to the easiest, safest, and most neurologically conservative choice, denying parole entirely. Our highest ideals of objective justice are invisibly anchored to our blood sugar levels. And what about hormones? We've got to shatter some preconceived notions here. Does testosterone just cause blind, unprovoked violence? No, it actually drives status-seeking behavior. In a society that rewards generosity with status, testosterone will literally increase pro-social behavior. What about oxytocin, the famous cuddle hormone? Well, sure, it fuels in-group bonding and trust, but at the exact same time, it increases suspicion and preemptive hostility toward anyone outside your group. It is the biological glue of tribalism. And cortisol, chronic stress literally rewires you. It physically shrinks your rational prefrontal cortex while enlarging and hypersensitizing your fearful amygdala. These hormones are acting as subtle puppet masters long before we even realize we have a choice to make. Rewinding even further. Section 3. Decades to millennia before, from childhood to evolution. Have you ever wondered why teenagers are famously impulsive and susceptible to peer pressure? It's not because they're ill-intentioned. It's actually because of asymmetric brain development. During adolescence, the limbic system, which houses your emotional and dopamine reward centers, reaches full maturity. But the prefrontal cortex isn't fully wired and insulated until your mid-20s. This insulation process, called myelination, is what makes brain signals travel fast and efficiently. Without a fully myelinated frontal lobe, teenagers basically possess a high-powered emotional accelerator without any biological brakes to slow it down. Now, what's really fascinating here is how this completely destroys the old nature versus nurture debate. Welcome to epigenetics. It proves that our environment actually dictates how our genes behave. You might inherit a genetic variant for depression or aggression, but environmental triggers, things like childhood trauma or, conversely, a really loving home, act as chemical switches. They attach tiny tags to your DNA that physically turn those risky genes on or off. Genes do not determine your fate. They just offer a biological menu of potential responses that are ultimately activated by your environment. Section 4. The biology of tribalism. Us versus them. From intense sports rivalries to racism and political polarization, we humans just love to divide the world into us versus them. So I want you to guess, how fast does your brain actually categorize and judge someone who looks like they belong to a different outgroup? Just 50 milliseconds. That is a fraction of a second, significantly faster than conscious thought. Functional brain imaging actually reveals that when shown a photo of someone from a different outgroup, the amygdala fires in 50 milliseconds. Tying right back to that second before concept, this instant neural shortcut signals a potential threat long before your prefrontal cortex even registers that you're looking at a face. We simply don't have conscious control over that initial spark. Automatically, our brains view us as unique individuals with complex motives, deserving of trust and second chances. Conversely, we view them through simplified, uniform stereotypes, primarily as a threat. But here is the incredibly hopeful twist hidden in our biology. These boundaries are highly fluid. If you take people of different races who initially triggered that amygdala alarm and simply put them in matching local football team jerseys, the racial amygdala activation completely shuts down. The brain immediately stops categorizing by race and starts categorizing by jersey color. Our biology hardwires us for tribalism, for sure, but our culture and conscious minds can easily reprogram exactly who belongs to our tribe. Section 5. Empathy and moral courage. True moral heroism isn't just about feeling bad for someone. If you only experience what's called distress empathy, the pain matrix in your brain mirrors their suffering so intensely that you feel personally overwhelmed. To reduce your own anxiety, your brain tells you to look away or just walk away. This isn't necessarily a moral failure. It's a biological defense mechanism to protect yourself from emotional overload. Compassionate action, however, is a completely different story. It happens when the prefrontal cortex successfully regulates and calms that distress, allowing you to focus outward. The reward centers activate and you actually step up to relieve their pain. Empathy isn't just a feeling. It literally requires the prefrontal cortex to regulate emotions so you can be of help. Section 6. Rethinking free will. Sapolsky takes a completely uncompromising view here when we zoom out to the ultimate philosophical question of our journey. He argues that true free will, a conscious mind making choices entirely independent of its biological history, is a scientific illusion. To him, every single decision, thought, desire, and action you perform is the seamless, deterministic outcome of the exact biological chain reaction we've just traced. There is simply no room in the biological machinery for an uncaused choice to spontaneously alter the established laws of physics and chemistry. If that terrifies you regarding moral responsibility, consider the evolution of justice. Centuries ago, people with epilepsy were viewed as demon-possessed and were cruelly punished for their seizures. Today, neurology has taught us it's just a physical electrical storm in the brain. We treat the condition compassionately, and we simply don't let them drive until they're safe. Sapolsky argues that as neurobiology advances, we absolutely must shift our view of antisocial and criminal behavior in the exact same way. We must transition from punitive, retributive vengeance to pragmatic, humane prevention. We quarantine dangerous individuals to protect society, absolutely. But we do it to rehabilitate them, not to punish a broken biological machine. Which brings us to the end of our explainer, and to this lingering thought. If biology is not a life sentence, but rather a flexible system shaped by our environment, how can we design a society that builds compassionate brains instead of punishing broken ones? When we reduce poverty, heal childhood trauma, and foster inclusive identities, we are physically reshaping the human brains of future generations. Keep this biological timeline in mind the next time you judge yourself or others. Thanks for exploring with me, and keep seeking to understand the fascinating science of who we are.